Story 1. There was a truck versus pedestrian accident in front of my house. I was one of the first to arrive on the scene to help, while others called emergency services. I thought I would direct traffic since I generally feel unhelpful in emergencies. Shock can be overwhelming. I knew that the pedestrian was in great distress and danger. I recognized something was wrong with her leg, but I couldn't quite identify it. When a bystander attempted to help her stand up, I focused my attention on stopping that attempt. I pushed him away and made her lie back down flat. I sat with her and kept her alert. After a few minutes, a nurse who happened to be driving by stopped to assist me until the paramedics arrived. It took the emergency responders 20 to 25 minutes to get there, despite the fire station being 1 mile from my house. The pedestrian's leg had been severely injured, and an artery had been severed. If I had not kept her conscious until the ambulance arrived, and if the nurse had not stopped to help by applying pressure to the exposed artery until the ambulance arrived, the pedestrian could have died. In a positive turn of events, the nurse, the pedestrian, and I have become good friends, and we meet together once a month. Story 2. When I was a teenager, I witnessed a car accident right in front of my house. A car ran a red light and collided with another vehicle. The impact was so violent that one of the passengers was ejected from the car. I ran out to help, but there was nothing I could do. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the image of that moment, the sound, the stillness afterward, and the helplessness has never left me. It made me respect how fragile life is and how everything can change in seconds. Story 3. Coming home from a friend's house, I missed my turn for the highway and had to go through town. I watched a woman get hit by a car going far too fast, considering it had just come from a stoplight. I angled my car to stop traffic and helped her off the road while my partner called emergency services. It was an absolute mess. The poor woman was missing teeth, bleeding from her head, and one hand was severely injured and barely resembled a hand anymore. I stayed with her to give statements and to ensure the ambulance knew that she might have a concussion, as I saw her head bounce off the pavement twice. I'm pretty sure her head struck the hood of the car too. I don't remember my dreams, but if I did, I know she would be in them. Story 4. This isn't too disturbing, but when I was 4 years old, I saw a seagull eating the insides of a cat on the street. That's a scene I will always remember. Story 5. A friend and I were cruising along Riverside when we stopped at a red light near a record store. We noticed a couple of people arguing on the sidewalk, and one of them pulled out a gun and shot at the other. We ran the red light. Story 6. While working as a corrections officer, I saw a lot of disturbing things. The most troubling experience was when a man tied a noose around his neck and jumped from the second tier. Story 7. A video showed a lion eating a convicted poacher alive in a small cell. The poacher wore a helmet and a breastplate and was handcuffed, so the lion could only eat the non-vital parts. This was a punishment from an African country. Apparently, the anti-poaching units have significant authority in some areas. Story 8. Finding my father's deceased body has been a traumatic experience. He had passed away naturally 15 hours before I found him. He was at the bottom of the second stairway. He lived alone, while my mother resided in a home due to advanced Alzheimer's disease. He was 85 years old and had suffered a heart attack. It has been a long time, but I will never truly get over it. I miss you, Dad, despite all our issues. Story 9. I visited a man in agonal breathing at the end of life due to Parkinson's disease. I came to say my goodbyes, and I did. Seeing his wife cry over him while stroking his head with love was very moving. Story 10. When I was 5 years old, I was vacationing in Brazil. One night, I was outside playing soccer with my cousin when we heard an explosion. People rushed to see what was happening, and it turned out that gangs in the favela threw a grenade into a bar that had police and civilians inside. All we saw were body parts, debris, and fire. My aunt called my uncle to get us out of my grandmother's house and take us to his home. He picked us up and took us with him. A couple of hours later, the police returned and shot and killed 21 innocent civilians as retribution for the officers who were killed in the bar. I still vividly remember the 21 bodies lined up in wheelbarrows in the square while everyone was wondering what had just happened. Story 11. When I was 9, my father decided to take his new girlfriend on vacation with us. I had never met her before, and I wasn't allowed to use my phone because he said I couldn't contact my mom for 5 weeks. They decided that she had to perform an intimate act next to me while I pretended to be asleep because I woke up due to them. Story 12. When I was 17, I was a passenger in a car accident and I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. I flew right into the back driver's side window and split my head open on impact. I saw my skull and so much blood when I looked in the mirror. I guess I had so much adrenaline that I couldn't pass out. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have. I had to get 14 stitches, and I could hear the needle scrape against my skull with each pass. It still gives me shivers when I think about it. Story 13. When I was a child, I witnessed a pregnant deer being struck by a truck on a highway. The nearly full-term fawn emerged and struggled on the asphalt for a while before an oncoming car abruptly ended its brief life. This experience deterred me from eating red-colored food for a long time. Story 14. I was dog-sitting and went over to the house about 10 p.m. to let the dogs out one last time after attending a minor league baseball game. A golden retriever and a lab were there. The lab needed to be leashed while the golden typically did not. Unbeknownst to me, a Yorkshire Terrier was in the yard barking at the dogs through the sunroom door. As I leashed the lab and opened the door, I noticed the small dog making noise, but I didn't expect the golden to make a mad dash for the Yorkshire Terrier and brutally kill it right in front of me while I yelled and tried to keep the lab from dragging me over to the scene. It was shocking. I didn't know who owned the dog, so I had to go to a couple of houses to find out where the little dog lived. The owner said some awful things to me that night. Story 15. I have a significant list. One instance that comes to mind is the time I was working the door at a casino. We had the usual individuals who would come in during the early morning, and one woman walked in while vigorously scratching and picking at her face. To my astonishment, she literally ripped off her entire cheek as she walked past and tossed it in the trash can, continuing on her way. I mean, her entire cheek, from the top of her cheekbone beneath her eye down to the corner of her mouth. It was just gone. We checked on her to provide medical assistance, and what was left was green and rotting flesh where her cheek used to be. It wasn't bleeding or anything. She showed no visible discomfort. She just brushed it off. We called emergency medical services for liability reasons, but she refused to be checked out and went about her day. Story 16. When I was 13, I had a friend who attempted suicide, changed her mind, and called me. When I arrived, I didn't know what to do, so I called emergency services and held her. She was crying and told me she was afraid to die and begged me to help her. She was taken to the hospital but did not survive the night. Story 17. A man engulfed in flames stumbled out of a burning tanker and disintegrated into burning fragments when he fell to the ground. Story 18. This involves animal abuse. My biological father was a very disturbed and abusive individual. He would often beat my mother and abuse any animal in his path. When I was around 4 years old, my father, in one of his usual drunken rages, mutilated and tortured a cat on the front porch of my grandmother's apartment while my siblings and I were visiting. We witnessed him abuse this cat with his bare hands. He broke the cat's legs, bit off one of its ears, set the tail on fire, and repeatedly punched it. Miraculously, that cat did not die. We saw him limping around the complex days later. That was not the first or last time we saw him abuse an innocent animal. But this incident was particularly disturbing and has stayed with me all my life. He died in 2006 and will never hurt another animal again. Good riddance. Story 19. Abuse and isolation as an adult have taken a significant toll on me. However, as a child, I witnessed many terrible things, including crack dealers beating my mother. I also experienced a boyfriend committing double homicide and taking me to the scene afterward. I have a long list of traumatic experiences. Story 20. When I was 11, my parents let my sister and me go on a brief road trip to the beach with our neighbors. On the way back, they got a flat tire. The father of the family and my dad got out to change it. I perched at the window to watch, and within inches of my face, I saw a caravan being towed by a car take out the back half of the dad, instantly killing him. His father walked toward me as pale as a ghost and covered in blood, obviously in shock. He apparently died soon after in the hospital. I witnessed everything, and it changed my life. Now I have post-traumatic stress disorder. It was horrific, but I am grateful my brain has protected me to the best of its ability and has blocked out some aspects. Story 21. I saw emergency medical technicians attending to a person who had their neck slashed in a bar incident. I was walking by just as the victim was being loaded into an ambulance. There was a large amount of blood dripping off the bench they were assisting him on. I can still picture the slow, oozing drops of blood. This occurred in Whistler, British Columbia in early 2004. I also witnessed the police pull a jumper's body out of the East River, below the Queensboro Bridge. I accidentally captured part of it on my phone camera while taking pictures of the view and noticed something in the corner of my eye. The jumper's pants had been pulled down around their ankles. Their shirt was up over their head, and their torso was covered in large purple and red welts. This incident happened in January 2020, 2 months before the COVID pandemic began. Story 22. I watched a car on the opposite side of the highway panic during a traffic slowdown. It slid sideways, and as soon as it hit the soft shoulder, the car started rolling. 3 people in the car were ejected. I witnessed 3 high school students lose their lives. That was about 10 years ago, and I think about it often. Story 23. When I was in college, someone in my apartment complex killed a litter of kittens with antifreeze. A kind police officer came and took care of the kittens. I saw the mother cat for days searching for her kittens. It was heartbreaking. Story 24. I shared this once on an alternate platform before, but it was certainly disturbing. I was a horse enthusiast and grew up on a horse farm with my grandparents. One night when I was 17, we were taking a walk and heard a strange noise coming from one of the stables. My grandfather rushed over, gun in hand, to investigate. I followed. Sure enough, there was a man inside who had apparently snuck in, getting intimate with one of the mares. He screamed and tried to pull his pants up to run, but when my grandfather yelled after him and he saw the gun, he stopped. My grandfather told him to sit down with his hands up. My grandfather talked to the man about it and asked him why he was doing this. The man begged, saying he wasn't a bad person, had a job, cared for the poor, contributed to society, and just had this strange struggle involving horses for a long time. He didn't understand why it was so appealing to him, but he didn't want to harm anyone and begged my grandfather not to ruin his life. My grandfather was sympathetic and said he had known people with addictions and strange sexual issues, and what society would do to him wouldn't be fair. However, he did need to stop, and he had an idea to help him. So he gave him a choice. I can call the police, and whatever happens next for your life will ensue, or you can let me decide your punishment right here, and no one will ever hear about this. It won't kill you or maim you, and you'll be out of here by tomorrow, but that's about all I can promise. You're not going to like it, but I think you need it. The man, of course, chose the latter. My grandfather asked me to fetch him rope and horse gear from the adjacent shed. He tightly bound the man's hands together behind his back, led him to a stall with one of the horses, and helped him aboard, facing backward. It was at that moment I knew exactly what was going to happen, based on stories my grandfather had told me about past military punishments from his days in service. I wasn't sure if they were just exaggerations or really used back in the day on poor cavalry soldiers, but I knew it was about to become a reality for this man. My grandfather made him bend his head down, using his hand to assist, until the man was bent over with his face an inch away from the horse's rear. He asked me to hold his head in that position while he bound the man's legs, then used the rope to secure his neck, binding his head in place. He was quick about it too. It almost made me wonder if he had practiced this before. The man was shocked and horrified, saying, "No, not this, please. I won't come back, I promise." He fought against the restraints as best he could, but his face was quite stuck in the line of fire. His nose was just half an inch away from the horse's rear, perfectly centered. My grandfather told him he'd be released by the afternoon of the following day. meaning nearly a 12 to 15-hour punishment. He wouldn't accept any excuses. You wanted to be intimate with horses. I'm giving you what you wanted. You at least ought to know to stay on your own property and not scare people at night if you must indulge in this. But something tells me after tonight, you're not going to want to look at a horse for a very, very long time. I'm doing you a favor in the end. It was almost as if the horse knew too. The man shouted, "You can't do this." And I kid you not, in the very next second, the horse lifted its tail and let out the longest, most unpleasant-sounding 12-second-long flatulence. I immediately backed out of the stall and instinctively laughed. Looking back in, it was not a laughing matter for the man. He immediately started gagging, making the worst disgusted noises I had ever heard, and promptly vomited. It took him a solid 2 minutes to stop retching. And the horse was fine, of course. Many of the horses were used to carrying things strapped to them, like deer after hunts. I certainly did not envy the man being stuck there for hours. Story 25. My dad tries to use my brother's death for financial gain because he is a narcissist. If we are discussing visually disturbing experiences, I once had a kitten that was around 6 weeks old when I was 9. We had a swinging door, and as I went through it, the kitten followed without my awareness. The door swung back and tragically broke its neck. I was home alone with my brother, who was 12 at the time. I held the kitten in my hands as it died from its injuries. Story 26. Gangland slang. A man had been shot in his car in downtown Montreal around 1996 during a significant biker gang war. I rushed to the car and entered through the passenger side to see if I could provide some aid. He had been shot in the face and was making a distressing sound. Looking down at the passenger seat, I could see a few of his teeth still attached to a bit of gum and jaw. I had planned to watch the film Crash, directed by David Cronenberg, but decided against it. And if you know the movie, you'll understand why. Story 27. The police and justice system made no effort to prosecute the individual who abused me at gunpoint. They subjected me to more than 10 interviews, required me to collect CCTV footage of the event myself, and generally seemed indifferent. He was on parole for similar offenses and was never recalled to prison. If he had been, 2 other women he later abused would not have been harmed. Every cloud has a silver lining, however, as he now suffers from severe amnesia due to blunt force trauma. Story 28. When I was in college, I lived at the bottom of a hill next to the university. Many people enjoyed skating down the hill, and since there was little traffic, it was popular to cruise through there to gain speed for the next part of campus. One day, 2 people collided at the bottom of the hill. One was coming from the top, and the other was approaching from the opposite direction. They didn't see each other and collided head-on. One person was wearing a helmet while the other was not. The person with the helmet was fine, but the other kid hit his head on the pavement. I was doing dishes when I heard 2 girls screaming from my kitchen and could see some of what was happening through the window. I was the first person to reach the scene, and the poor kid was bleeding from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, seizing violently, and barely hanging on to life. I called emergency services and had a roommate gather every towel we had to try to stop the bleeding. Within the next 10 to 15 minutes, he was being airlifted to the hospital, but sadly, he never regained consciousness. Even after emergency services cleaned the scene, for weeks I could still see the blood trace on the pavement leading from where he lay to the storm drain, which was probably about 10 feet away. Story 29. I was at a restaurant with my girlfriend's mom. An older man in the booth in front of us said, "I don't feel good," and then promptly collapsed from a heart attack. Story 30. My friend and her children were murdered by her husband. Her mother and I were the first to find them when my friend did not show up for work and the school reported the children absent. He is serving a life sentence now, but I see Monica and her children's bodies and smell the blood in my mind every day. I am starting to think I should seek help for that. Additionally, another friend, who is not as close, had not heard from her mother for a few weeks, and it turned out her mother had died without air conditioning in the middle of August. I assisted her with the cleanup after they removed whatever remains they could from the house. I remember pulling up the carpet from the edges of the room so we could roll it out when I stood up and noticed something hard stuck to my pants. I picked it off and it was teeth. That experience was not traumatic, just unpleasant. Also, when I was a child, I witnessed a man beating his girlfriend with a part from a bicycle. Her forehead was severely injured. It was quite horrific. They were back together before she even left the hospital. The couple had come to buy items from my father, and she became upset when her partner spoke to my mother, or at least that is what I was told as I grew older. Lastly, when I was about 7 or 8, my uncle got into a fight with my mother's ex-boyfriend in our yard. After he knocked him out, he jumped on his jaw and smashed it. Rest in peace, Uncle Scott. He taught me how to fight and roll joints. Story 31. One of the strangest things I witnessed was driving through the mountains in the middle of the night in Washington state. We were traveling west and saw numerous emergency vehicle lights ahead. As we passed, there were several cars wrecked, and one was completely crushed to the point where I can't imagine anyone survived. A series of giant rocks, one almost the size of a car, had rolled off an adjacent cliff and across a field onto the road, colliding with the vehicles that likely never saw them. Even in the dark, you could see the path the largest rock had made across the field as it crushed the vegetation. It was like a scene from a horror movie in real life. Story 32. I was a senior in high school when my boyfriend, who had been with me for most of my high school years, was shot and killed at a party right in front of me. The worst part was that we lived in a very rural area in Idaho, and it was winter, so there was no chance of getting an ambulance to us. We had to put him in a truck and drive for 45 minutes in the dark and snow to get him to a hospital. He was still responsive when we started driving, but he died before we arrived. Story 33. My husband and I were visiting his bandmate's family's home, and there were kids running around. We had none at the time. Later in the day, I went into the family room and saw what I thought were dolls' legs sticking out of the cushions at the back of the couch. It looked so strange, and my mind was having a hard time processing it. I realized it wasn't a doll but a baby. I screamed for help and pulled the baby out. My husband's bandmate came running, and we performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation while waiting for the paramedics. I knew this baby was gone, but we tried. The parent had just left the baby on the couch with slightly older kids. They were jumping on the couch, causing the baby to get wedged and suffocate. Then they just left the room. They were young, too young to understand and be responsible for a baby. This happened almost 30 years ago, and I still see flashes in my mind's eye. Dolls lying in certain positions on couches still make me second-guess what I am seeing. Story 34. I was driving to work and looked in my rearview mirror while passing another car. In that exact moment, I saw a man jump off the bridge I had just driven under. He landed on another car, and that's when I chose to look away. I really couldn't comprehend what I had just witnessed and felt frozen. I couldn't decide what to do while still driving at 120 kilometers per hour. Later that day, it was all over the local news. The man committed suicide, and some other people were injured. Felt so surreal to me, as I could only believe what I saw because it was on the news. Sorry if my English is not perfect. I am not a native speaker. Story 35. In 1997, someone was driving too fast through a mall parking lot, searching for a space during the holiday rush. As they zoomed down a row, they noticed someone leaving and slammed on their brakes, then quickly reversed and accidentally hit a mother carrying a small baby. Fortunately, the baby was unharmed, but the mother suffered severe injuries. I have witnessed much worse incidents, but the completely preventable nature of this one always stays with me. Story 36. Somebody getting curb stomped in Gastown, Vancouver, at 2 a.m. while under the influence of mushrooms. That might have been around 1997, and it's still with me. Story 37. Not me, but a friend saw someone jump in front of a train at a crossing. It happened right in front of her. She described it as sounding like stirring macaroni and cheese followed by a red mist. Story 38. I tried texting my aunt to tell her I was in danger. She told me to put up with it, bragging about how it hasn't happened to her because she knows how to act, implying that I inflicted the danger on myself. I have always felt a coldness around her since I was young, a skin-crawling, unsettling feeling. I am 32, and she has never held back from yelling at me. The fact that she does this shows that I am disposable to her. I have never done anything to this older woman, to whom I always gave the benefit of the doubt. Story 39. I once saw a boy, maybe 13 years old, standing in the back of a horse barn. Suddenly, there was a loud bang outside. I think it was a car or tractor, but it sounded like a shotgun. At that moment, the horse kicked, almost taking the boy's head off. I thought he was dead. He had a divot in his forehead because his skull cracked. He now has to live out his life in an electronic wheelchair, with someone to feed him and keep him clean, all because a tractor backfired. I can replay that moment in my head. Poor kid. Story 40. I underwent 4 years of criminally negligent brain shock treatments. During one session, I woke up with my eyes spinning uncontrollably, and the anesthesiologist informed me that I had suffered a stroke from the electrical shock. The electroconvulsive therapy left me with lifelong disabilities, including epilepsy and a migraine disorder. My malpractice investigations are currently ongoing. Story 41. I saw a man get hit by a car while running across Aramingo Avenue in Philadelphia. He flew in the air and landed head first on a curb. The driver did not stop, and neither did anyone else. I was heading in the opposite direction, so I had a clear view of the incident and called emergency services. The man was alive and conscious, and I shouted to him, informing him that I had called for an ambulance. He responded that he was fine and did not want assistance. The fire truck arrived shortly after, and I left them to handle the situation. Story 42. My girlfriend's blood-curdling screams when we found her mother unconscious in the driveway still echo in my mind. She had fallen on a very hot day and couldn't get up, and we found her who knows how long later. Her internal temperature was 105 degrees when she got into the ambulance. Those screams haunted me for weeks. The pure terror and confusion from someone I love rang through my head repeatedly. Story 43. I was walking into the courthouse one day, in uniform. I was a sheriff's deputy at the time when a man approached me insisting he needed medical attention. He looked fine until he took his hat off, revealing a hatchet blade sticking out of his head, missing the handle. Story 44. When I was a teen, I was riding on the back of a family member's motorbike. A man, who appeared to be intoxicated, walked out in front of us without warning, and we hit him hard. I could smell the vodka on his breath as he rolled off me, and then the blood and dirt mingled while he lay on the ground. The way his limbs were crooked and broken will haunt me forever, but the sounds of his family members running out of their house, wailing and screaming for help, are what keep me up at night. The ambulance arrived in what felt like seconds, but we never found out if he survived or what kind of life he went on to live if he did. We were unharmed and extremely grateful for the kind people who came out of their homes and gardens to offer us juice and tea, along with general support, while some provided witness statements. In the end, we were found completely not at fault, but I have always known that deep down it was my fault. Nobody ever believes me, but I had a vision before we set off on the bike while we were eating fast food. I knew we would hit a man on that stretch of road. I recognized him wobbling nearby, and I knew right before he walked out, but I never said anything. I thought I was being foolish and superstitious, and I regret that decision every day. Story 45. When I was 11, my father proudly threatened to behead someone's children. He treated mob shows and movies as gospel instead of entertainment and acted on them. Story 46. I saw a cat flayed open and laid over an ant pile in one of the grass dividers in the parking lot of my local mall. I hope the person responsible for that is apprehended. I also witnessed the end of my father's battle with cancer. It wasn't peaceful, and the memory of the entire experience will always be etched in my mind. Story 47. I saw a video of a man who was attacked. They removed his arms, then kicked him, spat on him, and shot him repeatedly. Despite all this, he remained alive, and they continued to torture him. Story 48. When I worked as a case manager for unhoused clients, I went to check on one of them. He wasn't answering the phone or the door, and I was concerned, so I asked the apartment manager to do a wellness check. For some reason, I decided to go with her, and we found him dead in his bed. It haunted me for a month until I was able to speak with his son. Story 49. A 35-year-old, otherwise healthy woman gasped for breath while in a wheelchair. Knowing she had very little time left was traumatic for a medical student. The realization that the best medical care could not help her has always been vivid in my memory for over 10 years. Story 50. Not the absolute worst, but I advise not reading if you don't want to be disturbed. A man was speeding around a private road on his motorcycle, for the fun of it. Obviously dangerous and reckless, but some people just don't care or think it through. Well, he didn't end up killing himself, but my neighbor's Dalmatian, who was the sweetest girl ever, ended up running into the road due to the loud bike noises. Yes, he hit that poor puppy at probably 70 to 80 miles per hour and caused significant injuries. She didn't live very long after being hit. It was gruesome. My neighbor was beyond distraught, and the biker was somehow barely hurt. He was, however, taken to the hospital, and I assume he was arrested, but I never found out what came of it. It definitely shaped me in one way or another. I couldn't stand reckless drivers or bikers before, but now I have a strong disdain for them. I hope they face the consequences of their actions without bringing anyone else along with them. Story 51. On 4chan, I encountered actual content that was disturbing. It really shook me. I left as quickly as I could, but some things cannot be unseen. I do not envy law enforcement who has to review such material as part of their job. Story 52. Seeing a mother rocking her toddler who had been run over by a car and killed. She was whispering, "Oh baby, what will I do? Please baby, don't leave me." It was the moment I knew I wasn't capable of continuing to work in the emergency room. Story 53. I used to spend my afternoons at the emergency room break room when I was 10 so my parents could do the daily handoff. They weren't divorced, but they worked opposite shifts for a while. One day, a drug addict came in with an overdose, and the nurses had to act quickly. They had to use a stomach pump, and the woman was fighting against the nurses, so they had to force it. It's been almost 30 years now, and I can still hear her attempting to scream. I witnessed far too much sitting in that emergency room break room. Story 54. I was sitting in a cab in New York City when a man came running around a corner with another man chasing him. He gained a few strides before the second man caught up and shot the first man's brains out. The splatter hit the cab window. Story 55. One of my first memories is of my uncle's friend trying to shoot himself on the steps of my house. Nobody believed me, and I started to doubt myself until my grandfather moved, and the bullet was found. Someone knocked the gun away from his head, and it went into the ceiling. Apparently, it hit a pipe and had been leaking for years. Story 56. A man followed me to the post office in my town, and when I went to leave, he was outside exposing himself by some bushes while watching me. I witnessed everything. He kept smelling his fingers while he was doing it. He was arrested, but it was still very disturbing. Story 57. I was eating dinner in my favorite Mexican restaurant when a man at the next table fell off his chair and onto the floor, dead. Story 58. When I was 8 years old, a friend and I were playing in a ravine. It was mid-April, so there was melting snow and slush everywhere. It was messy. I found a severed human foot, detached at the ankle. It was still somewhat frozen and had turned gray. We thought it was funny at first, but then we started to think about it and realized that there was probably some foul play involved. Did we tell anyone or call the police? No, we somehow reasoned that we would be accused of the crime like a tag, you're it kind of thing. So we swore not to say anything to anyone, threw the foot down, and left. Story 59. I saw a drunk driver plow into a business while going in reverse. All the witnesses, except for me, videotaped everything on their cell phones instead of helping the victims. Only one other person ran in and grabbed the driver. Everyone else just watched with their phones out. Story 60. I was on the highway on Christmas Eve traveling from Tucson back to Phoenix. There was a severe accident involving 6 or 7 vehicles. I saw a few lifeless bodies while waiting through the traffic detour, which was quite disturbing to witness. When I considered that none of those individuals would be home for Christmas, I felt even more upset about the entire situation. It has stayed with me for 7 years, and I am still just as troubled by it now as I was back then. Story 61. I saw the aftermath on the sidewalk after a man presumably jumped from a high-rise window. It was horrific and traumatizing to see the remains, and it was awful to think of the suffering he endured beforehand that led to the decision to jump. Story 62. My dad's viewing before the funeral was surreal. I no longer handle open casket funerals well. Story 63. I lived 2 houses down from a set of train tracks when I was very small, around 4 or 5 years old, and I loved trains. I would run to the front door to watch them pass whenever I heard the train whistle. One day, I rushed to the front door just in time to see a white Trans Am attempt to beat the train. The car got partially over the tracks and was struck directly by the train, causing it to become airborne. One of the passengers was ejected and landed in the street in front of my house. The car landed upside down right next to them. Neither survived. My parents said I walked up to them and told them a train hit a car. They didn't believe me until they looked out the front door. I didn't watch trains anymore after that, and to this day I am terrified of them. Story 64. When I was 18, I saw a man burn to death on a construction site. I helped put out the fire on him. I can still smell the burning flesh 65 years later. Story 65. Just the other day, a man was drowning in a river in the middle of a busy city. No one thought to throw in one of the many lifeboats available. Hundreds of people started filming before emergency services were even called. He died. Story 66. I was around 6 or 7 years old when my teenage cousin took me to the terrace. He showed me his private parts and asked me to undress. I remember feeling a sense of unrest and panic, rushing down toward my mom. I didn't say a word to anyone. I still see my cousin at family gatherings. He has a daughter now. At this point, I am even unsure if it really happened or if it was a bad dream. I am over 30 now, but still remember the panic I felt that day. Story 67. I saw a video of a Komodo dragon ripping open a living pregnant deer and eating the unborn baby whole. It is not the worst thing I've seen, but it is the one I wanted to mention. Story 68. I tried to take my own life by drinking a bottle of vodka and 3/4 of a bottle of NyQuil. Then I fell asleep. I was only 145 pounds at the time, so I don't know how it didn't take effect. I could think but couldn't open my eyes. I thought, okay, I'm dead, but I'm still thinking. I just wanted it to be over. Then I felt a poke in my arm like a needle prick, and the pain radiated to my upper arm, my chest, and then my other arm and a bit in my stomach. It felt like my spirit was getting detached from my body, like ripping off Velcro. I thought, okay, just a little bit of pain, and then I'll be free. Hurry up. Then I lost consciousness and woke up in my room, thinking, what just happened? I laughed at myself, feeling like a failure for not being able to end my life properly. But I'm good now and no longer have those thoughts. Some days, though, it's still tough. After shoulder surgery, during rehabilitation, my physical therapist forced my arm to move after it had been practically glued to my side for a month or two. I screamed and called for my ex-girlfriend to grab my hand so I could squeeze. I talked to others who had similar surgeries, and none mentioned anything like that experience. I suspect the therapist was jealous because my ex-girlfriend attended all my sessions and was very supportive. He even asked, "Do you need your girlfriend here every session?" I laughed it off but later realized he was probably making a subtle jab at me because I had a caring partner. Story 69. I watched my brother die of self-poisoning when he was 17. He was blue, cold, and dead. I replay the image of him seizing on the ground every time I think of him. There was nothing I could do but call for help and wait. That night still haunts me. It was a holiday, too, and now I can never enjoy that holiday again. It only brings back awful memories. Story 70. My friend's dad passed away in his bathroom, and everyone who arrived at the scene, including me, my friend, and several family members and friends, did not want to deal with the situation. I can barely handle a drop of blood, but somehow managed to clean up the bathroom. The smell of a deceased body is something you'll never forget. I will also never forget what the floor looked like. It makes me feel sick just typing this out. Story 71. I used to start work at 5 a.m., so I would leave my place at 4:30. I lived in a less than desirable part of town. I was in my car, about to hit the highway on-ramp, when a person jumped out and threw a cat at my car. I saw it in my headlights for a split second, and I really hoped it was already dead. It hit my front bumper, and I heard a thump before it cartwheeled away into the dark. I just kept driving to work. When I got there and looked at my car, there was just a bit of blood and fur stuck to the grill. Story 72. Just yesterday, I was burning a brush pile. I heard some squeaks, like when water vapor becomes steam, but when I looked over, there was a mother rodent leaping from a burning log with her newborns clinging to her. Over the next minute, I heard 3 or 4 more of those high-pitched squeals. It broke my heart a little. Story 73. I once saw a person punch through a concrete wall. Men have emptied entire magazines at him and hit nothing but air. Story 74. A woman, overcome by heat on a summer day while wearing a fur coat, smashed headlong into a wall in her car. She had overtaken the car we were in, and I saw glass flying into the air. Story 75. I have shared this a couple of times. A child moved into our neighborhood, and my parents encouraged me to befriend him, but he was extremely cruel to animals. I was walking in the woods when I saw him standing alone, using a stick to poke at something in the ground. When I got closer, I saw it was a possum he had beaten to death, leaving it a mass of blood and fur. He was covered in blood, and there were a few broken, bloody sticks nearby. This is just one of the stories about his cruelty to animals. Story 76. I used to work in television news. One day, my reporter and I were following a story about a babysitter and the 2 children he was watching, who had been kidnapped by the mother's ex-boyfriend. We received a tip that 3 bodies had been found on a dirt road in the county, so we headed out. I drove down the dirt road very slowly to see if I could find the spot where the police discovered them when I noticed some crime scene tape. I grabbed my camera and started walking toward it to take pictures. This was the middle of July in Alabama, by the way. Then it hit me, the smell. I looked down and realized I was standing in blood and brain matter from the man and the 2 children who had been shot execution style in the road. It is a smell and scene I will never forget. Story 77. On my wrestling team, there was one kid who was genuinely strange. He was also one of the few members who used the shower after practice or matches in the locker room. Many of us had to pass through there to access our lockers, so we often saw him in the shower. One day, I witnessed him squat, rapidly defecate, and then push it down the shower drain. The entire incident happened in just a few seconds, and I barely had time to process what I had seen. Story 78. Both shooting and stabbing are more visceral, filled with adrenaline. I took a shotgun round to my back and head, and my ears feel like a colander. Being stabbed was a full-on fight for survival, so even though I was like a pin cushion, it wasn't until I got the other guy out that I collapsed from blood loss. It is nothing like the movies. Story 79. Observing how my politically connected relative misuses funds and how my stepfather rose to become the chief operating officer of the company feels just as corrupt as governmental politics. I have witnessed their plans, betrayals, and operations, and it has shown me the unfairness of life. Story 80. Take your pick. 1. People jumping to their death during a tragic event. A deceased individual with facial necrosis. A fight where one attacker subdued the other, causing severe head trauma with a picnic bench, resembling a scene from a popular television show. Story 81. I have witnessed many disturbing situations in my job, making it difficult to determine the most unsettling experience. The loss of children is always tragic. The suffering of animals can also be very upsetting. The sensation of rotting flesh slipping through my hands is particularly unpleasant. There was also the incident when someone accidentally vomited on my hand and placed a piece of human skin on my arm. Another unsettling moment was when a deceased infant was found in my back seat. I could continue sharing more experiences. Story 82. I witnessed an 18-month-old child and her mother suffer gunshot wounds in the parking lot across the street from my workplace. That was not a pleasant day. Story 83. A plane collision occurred above our basketball game at Whittier Edwards Junior High School in 1975. I witnessed bodies returning to the ground, which was horrifying. Story 84. An emergency room nurse reported a case involving a teenage girl who gave birth in the hospital lobby. The girl's stepfather was identified as the father. Days later, he was brought to the emergency room after attempting self-harm by using a shard of glass from a shattered mirror. He underwent emergency surgery but allegedly left the hospital while still in custody. I hope he faces appropriate consequences in prison. Story 85. Noticing how seemingly okay people can become totally caught up with intense yet unacknowledged mental health issues is genuinely disturbing and frightening. These issues can lay dormant for decades, yet their effects arise more or less every day. They can lead people to stalk others, prevent personal growth and adaptation, and cause immense damage to individuals and groups alike. Denial often becomes the coping method employed, and the longer this persists, the worse the effects become later on. I have seen people live in an alternate reality of their own making, believing it is normal and acceptable. When I stepped away from that situation, the entire family fractured. Psychosis, depression, and immense confusion followed. It is very difficult to spend years witnessing this, knowing what is going to happen, and feeling powerless to stop it. Even doctors say there is little one can do when faced with serious denial. It is one of the most challenging obstacles to overcome and to help others overcome. Story 86. A kitten is dying in front of me. It had a sudden and violent seizure that was so severe it was dragged halfway across the room by the spasms alone. Cracked its little head on the floor, which likely caused its death, and then it just went limp. It still makes me feel horrible to think about. Story 87. It hurt like hell. Not initially as adrenaline kicks in, but pretty soon afterwards. I was screaming like a baby until I received a shot of morphine. Story 88. I watched an adult duck at Disney try to drown a baby duck. I am not sure if it was successful, but it was definitely violent. Story 89. I had a neighbor who often got into trouble. Once, he took drugs with two women, attempted to assault them while they were asleep, and they retaliated against him. I heard the entire incident, and after he got stabbed and the women fled, he came to my door bleeding, asking me to call the police. The next day, I scrubbed his blood off my patio and realized how desensitized I had become after dealing with him for so long. I had to testify in court because everyone involved was under the influence of drugs and lying. Story 90. A man jumped off the freeway overpass just as I drove off the Tampa Avenue off-ramp. He landed right in front of me, a young man with a backpack. I called the fire station to find out how he was, and they told me he had passed away. I see him every time I get off the freeway there. Story 91. A series of autopsies at the medical examiner's office as part of law enforcement training has changed my perception of humanity. Story 92. At my best friend's funeral, he was 28. His mother's cries were haunting as she reached out, trying to get into the grave while they lowered him down. She fell to her knees and sobbed, and I will never forget that moment. Story 93. A family member passed away from a heart attack. I witnessed a man burned to death in a car accident. A man bled out from a stab wound in Mexico. I also held my baby girl, who was born prematurely, until she died. All of this is very sad. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.